It's the Inside Scoop Virginia, all the news Virginians want to know. Now here's the host of Inside Scoop Virginia, George Burke.
Welcome tonight to Inside Scoop Virginia. I got a real treat for you. My guest is Bill Turk of the Washington Post. Bill's been a reporter for about 30 years. He's worked for the Kansas City Star. He's worked for the Dallas Times-Herald. He's worked for Newsweek. He's been with the Post since 2002, and I believe since sometime in 05, you've been covering, end of 05, you started covering Fairfax County government. Well, Bill will be moving on to another beat at the Post. I'll let you tell us about that a little bit later. Some of us will miss him. Some politicians won't. That's the nature of the beast with reporting. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. Nice to be here.
Before we start talking about politics, and I'm sure that's what the junkies want to hear about, as you know, I'm a former journalist myself. In some ways, I still consider myself a journalist. I covered state politics, I covered presidential primaries and the like. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the state of journalism in America today. I'm a booster of the Post. I think it's certainly by far the most important news organ in the Washington area. It certainly makes an imprint on the national scene. And to the credit of the Post, even though it's costing more and more money to do it, you folks are keeping reporters on the campaign trails, both locally and nationally. I know a lot of media has started to pull back from a lot of these, covering these presidential candidates, which I think is a shame because you get a different perspective. Newspapers are past in some ways their heyday in terms of newsprint. My generation likes newsprint in our hands. My children who are in their 20s, one's early 30s, never hold a newspaper practically. They read it, but they read it on the web. Many of the smaller newspapers in this nation, which in many ways are the backbone of journalism, it's where many of us came from, number one. Number two, it's the hometown news that a national paper like the Post or the Times or the LA Times can't possibly cover. The AP can't even possibly cover it. They're hurting. One of the smaller papers I worked for, I spoke to the managing editor there a few weeks ago, and she said their own website is killing them. Their circulation is dropping. I think the Post circulation has dropped a little bit as well.
Yes.
Where's journalism going?
Well, it's a scary time. You're right. And we're gaining readers on the website, and we're gaining advertising revenue, but it's not enough to offset the losses on the print side. And I think that anybody who says they know where it's going isn't being candid. It's sort of, we just don't know yet. I suspect strongly that you'll see a lot of papers die off, daily papers die off in the next few years, but the good ones and the strong ones with committed ownership will stay on. And I don't think the ink on print, ink on paper is going anywhere. I think you'll still see it for a long time. It'll probably become a niche product down the road, but I think that the Post will be printing on paper long after you and I are gone to our reward.
Well, I hope so.
But ownership has really been important, and the Post, of course, has had the Graham family. And one thing that stuck with me the day that we won the 6 Pulitzer Prizes.
And congratulations on that. We talked about that before the show started.
Yes.
That's quite an achievement.
It is. And we had a ceremony in the newsroom, and someone made the point that, saying to Don Graham that the way Graham has handled the Post and has supported the Post has really been an act of patriotism. And I think that's true. I think it's an integral part of democracy, and what we do matters. And ultimately, whether it lands digitally or it lands on paper, there'll still be a need for people to know what's going on and to have information that they can use to make decisions about their lives.
Many folks don't understand that newspapers are a business like any other business. And new reporters, one of the first newspapers I worked for, when a new reporter would come in, they'd be asking a million questions. Sometimes they wouldn't understand why Wednesday's paper had a bigger news hole than a Saturday's. And you had to explain that because the back shops just laid out all the pages and they have lots of advertising, so they were able to give us a bigger hole.
That's right.
And with declining circulation, that means declining ad revenues, and ad revenues, and to a little degree, the subscription costs, but the ad revenues are what pay everybody's salaries.
No, the news, the amount of space we have for news is driven by that. And no, a lot of people don't understand that. And actually, for a lot of years, they were immensely profitable businesses, and they still are profitable a lot of places, but not to the extent that they were. And
Correct.
I think people who own newspapers were used to 25, 30% profit margins, or have a little bit of sticker shock now, dealing with 10, 15% profit. And
which is still a healthy profit.
It's a healthy profit in any business, and
other than the oil business.
Always right. So. But it's a different business model, and it's going to support a different size of newspaper. So it's all in flux. But I'm still pretty optimistic that it's going to be, we're going to be around in one form or another.
I spoke to the managing editor, who was actually a cub reporter when I was working for this newspaper 30 plus years ago, just a few weeks ago, and when I was in New Hampshire, and she was bemoaning the fact that they have fewer staff members in the newsroom today than they had back in the 70s. And that revenue just can't support it. And that, they're still putting out a pretty good product, but everybody's having to hustle a little bit more. Now, it's a big jump from a paper with a circulation of 50,000 to a paper the size of the Post. I mean, your newsroom is vast, and the first time I walked into it, I was still a young reporter at a smaller newspaper, and I was pretty proud of our little newsroom until I walked in there and saw acres of reporters and desks.
That's right.
I just think it's very important that true journalism stay alive and continue. And I always worry, as it moves into the web side of things, that it may not maintain the same level of polish and professionalism, because the new media is very important, but it's a little more loosey-goosey maybe than what is expected of the monolith that comes out every morning on the newsstands. Let's talk about new media a little bit. So you got more and more of the Post is investing more and more on the website.
Absolutely.
And for many of us, it's invaluable. I can get it on my BlackBerry. Wherever my laptop or a computer is, I can read the Post. And if you wanted to do that even as soon, not that long ago, 10, 15 years ago, you had to subscribe to the Washington Post Weekly, which I presume is long gone now, but that was a way, if you were out of town, to get a feel for what the Post was doing on a weekly basis. How is it going between the web side and the newsroom side? Now, obviously, you contribute to both. You're known as an advocate of new media and have some experience with it. How's it working?
Better. It used to be, I think, a gap. Physically, the operations are in different places. The Washington Post is in downtown D.C. WPNI, Washington Post Newsweek Interactive, is in Arlington, and but I think there's been a real effort to sort of bridge those cultures, and one of the things you saw, particularly I go back to the Pulitzers again, was looking at how the prize-winning entries, how the news side and the website work together to really sort of enhance the impact of those stories with pictures and with video and with audio. We're slowly becoming one operation, and I think over time, it will be a seamless operation. We're a few years away from that, but story happens at a certain time of day. We will file a web version of the story. In a way, it's like a new version of the old thing, pounding out a story to get it out as soon as you can. So the more things change, the more they stay the same in some ways. But no, we have integrated the web and filing for the web into our daily routine.
I'm sure some of your photographers love it because it gives them an opportunity to showcase more of their work.
Absolutely.
One of the other things I noticed relative to the photo side, I worked as an AP photographer for several years, a contract photographer, is in the old days you would hand over your film, or maybe you'd even soup it yourself, but then all the contacts would go to an editor who would decide what was going in the paper and pretty much decide how it was going to be cropped, etc. Today, the post photographers carry a laptop. They have a T-Mobile card that's good at any Starbucks.
Right.
They roll into a Starbucks, they load in their card, whether it's SD card, whatever kind of camera they're using. They look at everything they have, and they only send a sampling to those editors. So the actual photographers have much more control over at least the images that are sent in.
Very much. We are now, it's expected.
Which, as a former news photographer, I would have loved to have at the time.
It's extraordinary. All the changes. When I started in 1976 in Kansas City, I think, the last generation of reporters who sat at a typewriter on deadline and would call for the copy boy to come up and take it page by page if I was on deadline. And that was the waning day of that. And now it's just there's no. It's hard to describe the changes that have taken place.
I have a comparable story. Of course, there were no computers back then. And we had a few in the newsroom. They were dummy units and had this big room with raised floors in it. I have more power in my BlackBerry than that whole room had back in, this is 74, 75. I covered the New Hampshire State House. And we were a PM paper, or an afternoon paper at that time. And I would literally push that we had an 11 o'clock deadline, I'd push it to the hilt, and I'd get on the horn on the phone, call back to a rewrite person at 10 minutes of 11, and literally dictate a story from my reporter's notebook, from my notes. And that's a lost art, pretty much today.
We had guys in Kansas City afternoon newspaper cycle. You're there at 11:30 in the morning. One guy who covered the federal courthouse for years, I don't think he never wrote a story. In like 30 years, he would dictate all his stories on deadline at 10:30 or 11 in the morning.
Yeah, and it was exciting. They'd be screaming at me and cursing at me in the newsroom all the time, but my goal was to get the latest and the greatest in at the very last minute. And you could do that with a PM. If you didn't cover those morning stories, what was the point of being an afternoon newspaper?
No, there was none.
All those newspapers have moved, most of them have moved to morning papers now. Which is a bit of a shame. We're going to take a break in about 30 seconds. I wanted to use this time to remind our viewers that you can call in and talk to Bill Turk. The number is 571-749-1166. And we're going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about politics in Fairfax. We'll continue talking a little bit more about journalism. We may talk about the blogs. We'll just see where it goes.
Absolutely.
So we hope you'll stay with us. And just a plug for tomorrow night, my guest is going to be Judy Fader. Mark is out of town for Passover, so I'm doing 2 shows. So I'm going to have Judy Fader, who's the 10th, one of the Democratic candidates in the 10th Congressional District. But I think today we'll just spend more time talking about the 11th. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
How far would you go to help someone? Would you go to the end of your driveway? Would you cross a street? Would you cross an ocean? To a place 6,000 miles from home? And how long would you go? Would you go for a week? A month? A year? Would you go for 2 years? Would you go if you could use your knowledge to teach someone, and in the process, maybe learn something yourself? Life is calling. How far will you go? Peace Corps.
James, don't forget your helmet.
Will do.
Not a helmet. Your bike helmet.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm James Thrash with the Washington Redskins. On the football field, a helmet is an important piece of equipment. I also wear another helmet that's just as important. A bike helmet. It's the most important piece of equipment you'll have the next time you're out on your bike. Wear yours and make sure your kids do too. Safety first with the Skins.
Monica and her friends want you to know that you should never get near a dog when it is eating, playing with a favorite toy, or sleeping. It's really important to make time for exercise and games and keep your dog's vaccines up to date. Never leave a dog in a small, confined space. This can make dogs aggressive like Monica. If you follow this advice, you and your dog can play safely and happily together.
Now back to the Inside Scoop Virginia. Call in live and let your voice be heard. Here again, your host, George Burke.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop Virginia. My guest today is Bill Turk of the Washington Post. Bill is leaving us here in Northern Virginia to go downtown. I'm going to ask you about that in a second. And we're going to be discussing journalism, politics in Virginia for the next 45 minutes. So what's your new beat?
Well, I'm going to cover the D.C. public school system. And I had not really intended to leave. I was very happy to stay in Fairfax, but as is the nature of the business, these things come up quickly and sort of unexpectedly. And I just think it's too interesting a story to turn down. What Chancellor Rhee and Mayor Fenty are trying to do. It's almost like Gorbachev trying to turn around the old Soviet Union. And so I think it's a good opportunity, and I'm going to tell you.
She's pretty bold.
She is bold. She's bold, and she's going to have to be bold. And there's a whole that road is littered with the bodies of ex-chancellors for that and superintendents of that system, and so she's going to need to be bold. And Fenty has tethered his political future to her, so he's going to have to be bold too.
I spent a little time around Fenty about a little over a year ago, shortly after he got elected. The new fire chief's an old friend of mine, and there were some things with one of my clients we were doing with the fire department, and Fenty participated. I found him to be a pretty down-to-earth character. He listened to people, he understood the importance of getting out on the streets, so to speak. Tony Williams did some good things, but he's a radically different kind of mayor than Tony Williams was. So I'm sure your paths will cross with him, although the Post covers him, has a lot of different people covering him. But yeah, Rhee is very feisty, and I wish you good luck. Let's talk about your beat here a little bit.
It's my exit interview, my Fairfax exit interview.
What was your, you rolled into Fairfax the end of '05. While it may be the largest jurisdiction in the Washington area, I'm sure it wasn't viewed in, any daily newspaper, the city, the center city is always viewed as the hub. A lot of my friends who live downtown, et cetera, view Fairfax as someplace it's like, next to West Virginia.
Right.
Well, we know it's not. What was your thoughts when you first walked onto the scene and the cast of characters you encountered and the like?
I got interested right away. I thought that it was, because of the vastness of the place, 400 square miles, million people, hugely diverse. I had no idea how diverse it was when I got out here, and I just thought it was a very rich mix of issues and of personalities. And Chairman Connolly is always interesting, never backs away from a fight.
Always eminently quotable.
Eminently quotable. And I think that what was interesting to me about Fairfax County government is that they do pride themselves on what they think is sort of a smooth running machine, and they like to talk about the national awards that they've won for governance, and that's all true, but that made the challenge that much more interesting in terms of seeing where things maybe perhaps didn't work as smoothly as they would have liked, and trying to make this government work in a county that is changing so radically, so quickly.
Well, you know, it was funny. I've talked to various political figures and others who'd say, that Bill Turk, I mean, you know, he's always sticking his nose under the tent. He's always... I said, well, reporters are natural-born cynics. That's what you're supposed to be. How do you think Fairfax government runs?
Well, I would question the cynic thing. Cynicism is not really, you know, it's not really, it may be perceived by some people as cynicism, but we just view it as accountability and trying to hold people accountable and not accepting necessarily the first face value explanation you get. That may qualify in some people's minds as cynicism, but I just think it's the way we do business. How does it run? Generally, you know, compared to other jurisdictions in the area, you know, so say like you know, the district or Prince George's, there's not, yeah, there are not the kind of gross managerial issues, I think is the best way to put it. But you know, they have their problems, and they can step on their tails like everybody else. We had this issue with the reassessments a few weeks ago, where the tax department just decided, without really vetting it with anybody, well, it's time to sort of raise the land values, and which may have been technically and professionally sort of the right thing to do, but politically it was pretty maladroit.
Tone deaf.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's, you know, there's stories like that.
I sometimes the chairman, because the government runs without him. That, you know, they set tone more than anything else, and sure they make some policy, but once that the government runs almost independently of the supervisors in a lot of ways. I don't think a lot of people realize that with Fairfax County government. And if you have a strong chairman, he's going to stick, you know, be in there and be pushing and pushing. But I have found at the staff level that they're not political. You know, I mean, I play politics all the time, but you talk to the staff, they sort of don't want to be involved in that side of it. Have you found the same type of... To some extent, yes. Although I will say that I think Tony Griffin is now... I feel sorry for the Board of Supervisors in particular.
Been around close to 10 years as county executive, and you don't stay in that job for that length of time without having some political skills of your own, without being a pretty good politician, because you have essentially, you know, 9, 10 clients, political clients that you have to keep happy. And he's been very skillful at reading what they want and trying his best to deliver it. And I think that, you know, he doesn't, not everything runs by fiat there. I think you saw in this last budget that's going to be adopted tomorrow, the board made quite a few changes in what Griffin proposed. And, you know, so he very much has to be attuned to what they want, and he's a pretty good politician.
It's a county manager, a city manager. Usually they don't have a lot of job security, I mean, they're constantly moving around. So the fact that he has been there a decade. On this story you reported in this morning's paper, there were a lot of changes. It looks like Pat Harity's trying to bounce Connolly's affordable housing stuff. I think Connolly will be hard-pressed to let that happen.
No, that's not going to happen. And it's not just Connolly. I mean, the board is totally committed to setting aside that penny for affordable housing. And there's a lot of questions about, you know, what, you know, just how that program is working. And one of them is how many people have actually been helped at this point. They're buying up a lot of places, but a lot of those places are occupied, and they can't throw those people out on the street. And so this is a very long-term, long-haul process, and it's not as if there are scores of people who are suddenly ensconced in affordable housing.
No, I wouldn't see that happening anyway, but I mean, the value of property is just so high here that, you know, it's to the benefit of the county to whatever it happens, to have some portion of their workforce living within their borders.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think we're seeing less and less of that, other than the old timers who've been here for a long time and bought their houses inexpensively. your average firefighter can't come into Fairfax and expect, they're living in Pennsylvania, they're living in West Virginia, they're living in Maryland, they're living all over the place.
It's a little easier with their schedules to do that,
Correct,
too.
yes. Yeah. And many of them choose to, don't get me wrong. They choose to live out in the country, and they prefer it that way. There isn't much country left in Fairfax anymore. You can be fooled. You go into Great Falls, or you go out to Clifton, or, even next to my house, I have woods and stuff.
Yeah.
But half a mile away, I have gang fights and high-rise.
The larger dynamic going on here is Pat Harity would like to be the next chairman, and I think he is.
Buildings and, traffic jams.
But Pat Harity. And he's done a fairly energetic job of setting himself up as the sort of the preeminent sort of opponent on policy issues on the board, and most board meetings now always have a pretty good spirited back and forth between Jerry Connolly and Pat Harity. So
he didn't waste any time.
No, it's dueling Irishmen on the board right now.
Do you think a Republican has a chance of winning a countywide office these days, as the demographics and the voting profile is changing in this county? It's
going to be tough. Pat's got some skills politically, and he's got a lot of energy, but the county is, the numbers are what they are, and I think a Republican trying to win countywide now faces a really tough slog.
Yeah, I do too. And you have the secondary issue. Fairfax, well, obviously I chair the 11th district. The 11th district is the most highly educated and wealthiest congressional district in the country. And that reflects, in terms of Fairfax, I think it's 1 or 2 per capita income as it is. And as bad as Prince William or some of these other outlying counties, people are driven work-wise. They're trying to juggle kids and everything else. And sometimes I wonder how much they really focus on local government, except when it comes to taxes.
That's right. I think that, I find this to be an electorate that is pretty focused on local government. I think that they, because they're very sophisticated about how government works, a lot of them have been in government, or they're in policy.
Or work for government now.
Or work for government. And they're a very demanding clientele, and they expect a high level of performance from every level of government. And I think you see that in Fairfax. It's the questions at the hearings are very knowledgeable. So to that extent, it's a fairly high level of discourse, I think. So I think it's a demanding crowd.
Well, we'll get back to this demanding crowd in 2 minutes. Hang in with us. My guest today is Bill Turk of the Washington Post, and we'll see you back on the other side. Thanks for watching. Again, a very high level of education, but it's not.
People are not easily put off, and
Go to jail for a gun crime, and your family serves a sentence with you.
I'm Bob Costas, and I've been broadcasting sports for a long time. Much of what I do is ad-libbed, but still one of the most important aspects of my job is being able to write. Narrations, essays, commentaries. It's essential to express those thoughts and concepts clearly and concisely. Good writing is essential for almost any career. And with today's advanced technology, the National Commission on Writing reports that the need to write well has never been more important. Writing is everybody's business.
Sure, my neighbors Jean and Louise, They may be superheroes with superpowers, but that doesn't make them so super at saving energy and money.
Honey?
I may not be able to harness the power of the elements, but I save significant cash and help the environment with appliances, electronics, and windows featuring the Energy Star label. So discover your own energy-saving superpowers. Go to ase.org/consumers.
Mom, Dad's making fondue again.
Now back to the Inside Scoop Virginia. Call in live and let your voice be heard. Here again, your host, George Burke.
Welcome back. My guest is Bill Turk, Washington Post, covered Fairfax County government here for several years, is moving on to go downtown and cover the D.C. schools. So I think we're going to pick his brain a little bit on the politics now and see what he thinks about what's been going on in Fairfax. The biggest race right now, and I'm proud to be sort of sitting on top of it, it's a bit of a powder keg, is the 11th Congressional District race on the Democratic side. Looks like the Republicans are all set. They have this guy, Keith Fimian. I saw him for the first time the other day. He carries himself well. I don't know if you spent any time around him or talked to him.
Only on the phone.
Yeah, he carries himself well. You know, he looks the part a little bit, and he's raised a bunch of money, a lot of it his own. But and Tom Davis has endorsed him, so I think he's going to be a relatively formidable candidate. But we thought that about Gary Bays running against Jerry Connolly in the chairman's race as well, and it turned out he really never caught fire.
No, he didn't.
And the big fear there was he was going to dump a bunch of money into this race. He had the ability to dump millions of dollars, and that could have really changed that race. Money, you know, is the mother's milk of politics, is what a lot of people say. And it didn't happen. Now we have a similar guy who looks like he's got deep pockets, and he's also raised some money. And meanwhile, we have 4 candidates running in the 11th District. I will say right off the bat, I think we have 2 lead candidates and 2 secondary candidates. Not that anything can't happen in politics, but we have 2 very seasoned politicians who've both held high-ranking office, and they're already starting to take bites out of each other's butts. So
that's correct.
Let's talk about that race a little bit. What do you see?
Well, you have 2 candidates, Jerry Connolly and Leslie Byrne. They both are in a position to make pretty strong cases to the primary electorate. Chairman Connolly has been chairman. He's been a supervisor from the Providence District, and he had a whole other career before that on Capitol Hill as a staffer for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Has a pretty deep, nuanced knowledge of foreign affairs, and so that all serves him very well in the campaign for Congress. Leslie Byrne has actually been to Congress. She's served in state government. And she also, she has her own strong record. So I think that, and neither of them are interested in, neither of them have backed away from a fight.
Yeah,
so
they're both fighters, no doubt about it.
And Jerry seems to be using the electability issue, and well, they're both using the electability issue. But Jerry's argument is he's won 5 times, never lost, and can come to Congress knowing the system, understanding the system. And Leslie is, I think, Leslie Byrne's trying to use some of the likability issues about Connolly. There was a mailer that went out under the rubric of Emily's List, the women's political fundraising organization, that tried to get a little bit at the temperament issue for Connolly, and also his relationship with the development community. So I think all the lines of argument are pretty much out there, and we'll see how spirited it gets.
I don't think there'll be any real surprises. Both of these candidates have been open books for a long time, and they've both held other offices and had other races where reporters have peeked underneath the tent and sized them up. And you know as well as I do, stuff that happened 6-8 years ago doesn't carry much weight with the voters today, particularly if it's been laid out on the table in the past. It just doesn't mean too much. I think that we're in for a battle royal. As you said, Leslie Byrne already had an Emily's List piece out, taking a shot at Connolly. Connolly started to hit the mails with some pieces on the war and the environment and women's issues to define himself. And the other two don't have the kind of money to match it. I mean, I was out of town last week, but from the little pieces I got, it looked like Connolly raised about $500,000, and it was his first foray.
Right.
He just entered this quarter. And what did Byrne raise? She was in 340, 350?
I think so. I don't remember. But, you know, it was not as much as Connolly, but still
competitive.
It's competitive.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things to watch will be Jerry Connolly has, for the last 10 years or so, been strictly focused on local issues, and now he's going to have to, we're really going to start to hear his voice on the wider world of issues, national issues, international issues, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays. He says he's been opposed to the war from the beginning, and I think there are some questions being raised principally in the blogs right now about his employment at SAIC, which is a major war contractor, and you know he may have to do a little more explaining than he would like to do. So we'll see where that goes, and so it'll be an interesting race.
Knowing both sides, I'm sure they're prepared to respond and explain away.
Oh yes, no,
pretty much anything.
They know they know the questions that are coming, and I'm sure they've thought the war gamed out what their answers are going to be.
We're going to get back to talking about this race, but we have a phone call right now from Kathleen from Falls Church. See whether she's going to skewer the post, Bill.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Quick question. I know that Jerry Connolly has obviously been in politics, but he's also held private employment. I really know nothing about Leslie Byrne other than the fact that she's run for political office several times. What has she done from a private employment standpoint? What other than run for office?
You know, it's a really good question, and I have to say, I don't know, to tell you the truth. George would probably know more about that than I would. What does she do between campaigns?
She has a consulting firm. I don't know too much about it, to tell you the truth, but she, you know, obviously presents herself as a small businesswoman, but I quite frankly don't know a lot of the details either. And as the chair, I'm trying to stay neutral, so I wouldn't want to delve into it too deeply, but I think it's
a good question, and probably one we should we should poke around a little, because I honestly have to say I don't know much about it.
Thank you, Kathleen. So let's get back to this race. What do you think are going to be the defining issues? Is it going to be personality? Is it going to be experience? Is it going to be who yells the loudest or whacks the hardest? I mean, what do you think is going to be the defining issue for the voters?
I think at the end of the day, there's probably not a great deal of daylight between the two of them, and I would agree with you. Chairman Connolly actually says as much, and I think they are both going to make their case on who is the better November candidate and who is the better general election candidate. And Chairman Connolly's argument is going to be that, you know, he wins. He runs and he wins, and he's going to try to paint Leslie Byrne as a sort of a serial candidate, a serial runner, and I think, you know, on the other side, Leslie Byrne will be we're raising questions about, you know, about Chairman Connolly's temperament, about his relationship with the development community, his relationship with SAIC, and just whether he will, you know, whether he is an accessible, likable candidate for November. So I think that's probably kind of what it's going to come down to.
You know, if you talk to the campaign managers, and I try to stay in touch with both of them. I try to stay in touch with all the campaigns, and I don't want to, we'll talk a little bit about Deneni and Lori Alexander as well, because I am bending over backwards to treat all of them fairly. We're going to do 4 debates, one right here with the 4 of them. We'll have a slightly different format, but we'll do an hour-long slugfest here. And then we're going to try and do one in each of the jurisdictions, Fairfax County, Fairfax City, and Prince William County. And one reason that the 11th CD committee is doing it is we won't do one unless all 4 of them are there. I don't want to do any of this empty chair stuff, and we can't. I mean, at this point, they're all candidates for the Democratic nomination, so I'm going to try and treat them all fairly. But having said that, as we discussed, there's clearly two who are ahead in money, ahead in name recognition, and quite frankly, ahead in experience in terms of what they've done professionally and what they've done politically. You know, if you talk to the campaign managers, a lot of it's going to depend on who gets their vote out.
Yes, exactly.
You know, people say, well, we had this huge turnout for the presidential primary. We're not going to have that kind of turnout on June 10th. And then, by the way, that is when the primary is June 10th, so I hope everybody will vote. So it's really going to be, to a degree, a ground game on how the strategy of these campaign managers. You know, all the speeches and all that stuff is icing on the cake, but it's pulling people out of their homes on primary day what gets you elected.
That's a good point, exactly.
And there are some who suggest that Byrne has more of a grassroots campaign. But as you know, that remains to be seen, I guess. You know, Connolly just won an election. I mean, his plus is we could spend all day going back and forth on this, and I don't think anyone will know for sure until. What about the? I've got one for you. What about the dueling polls?
I don't know. When I look at a poll that's been released by a campaign, you know, we will pay some attention to it, but with a real grain of salt, because you never get the whole. You never see the internal numbers, or just it's, you know, so you just have to take it pretty much with a very cautious view. You know, polls, I don't think they mean a whole lot at this point, and we will report them, but I don't put a lot of stock in them, to tell you the truth. By having this new media, by having you blog, obviously, it gives you an opportunity to report on polls that you probably never would have reported at all on in a newspaper. I remember the old days when I'd be pushing candidates' polls, and the Post reporters would say, "We're not interested. We will not report in print about a candidate's poll." But you get a little latitude on your blog, and you can put stuff in. So you put it in there. What kind of readership do you think? What kind of, compared to the people who see an article in the Metro section, or even on page 1, as you make sometimes, of the A section, what's the difference in readership between your blog and that? I mean, is it a vast difference? I think it's, I think there are some devoted readers of the Virginia Politics blog, but I think it's a pretty small, pretty circumscribed audience of people that are intensely interested, and we get comments on there. You know, some of them not very friendly.
And they comment on your articles too.
They comment on the articles. They comment on, you know, your heritage sometimes, and you know, and all of that. But it's an audience that you take seriously, because they do pay attention, and they're interested in politics, and we want to try to build that audience. But still, at the end of the day, what appears in ink on paper is still our primary audience. Right?
In my day, you worried about a few letters to the editor coming in, you know, usually ginned up by somebody you had, in my case, somebody I'd whacked around in newsprint, and they gin up the letters. One particular one I remember was when I questioned the financing of the Seabrook nuclear power plant, which was a big issue in New Hampshire, and suggested that maybe a public service company would go bankrupt for this, and it would hurt them financially. Well, there were like 100 letters that came in calling me an economic illiterate, which they ginned up, but only a couple of them could run because of the space. On the blogs, or even on your own blog, every comment, or on your stories.
You see them all.
We're going to have to break again, and we'll be back in about 30 seconds. If you are interested, this may be your last, I'm sorry, we're back in 2 minutes. This will be your last shot at Bill Turk. You won't be able to kick him around anymore. He'll be going into the district and covering schools. So if you have the inclination, our number here is 571-749-1166. And we'll be back in 2 minutes for our final segment. Thanks for watching.
One day, I forgot to throw away my trash after lunch, but then I saw it later when I was playing in the woods. The next week, I went boating with my grandpa, and there it was. I tried to go swimming, but I couldn't because of my trash. And when I went fishing, well, you can guess what I caught that day. So now I always throw away my trash in the garbage can, where it belongs.
1 in 8 Americans goes hungry. One idea helped change that. A community started a garden that blossomed into farmers markets. 1 in 6 children lives in poverty. One group of women found an answer by opening a daycare center that their neighbors could afford. Today, 36 million Americans live in poverty. But one by one, people are helping themselves and each other to change the picture of poverty to one of hope. For easy ways you can help, visit povertyusa.org.
Every year, 250,000 Americans are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
My fellow scientists and I are working on treatments and a cure for this deadly disease.
Millions of lives are at stake. Alzheimer's disease affects 1 in 3 families.
We're committed to uncovering the mystery of Alzheimer's.
And we're not going to quit until the job is done.
To find out more about Alzheimer's disease, call 1-800-437-2423.
Only through research will a cure be found.
James, don't forget your helmet.
Will do.
Not a helmet. Your bike helmet.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm James Thrash with the Washington Redskins. On the football field, a helmet is an important piece of equipment. I also wear another helmet that's just as important. A bike helmet. It's the most important piece of equipment you'll have the next time you're out on your bike. Wear yours and make sure your kids do too. Safety first with the Skins.
Now back to the Inside Scoop Virginia. Call in live and let your... Here again, your host, George Burke.
Welcome back. My guest is Bill Turk, and we're going to go straight to the phones for a call from Jack from Fairfax. Jack, what can we do for you tonight?
Yes, I've been to a couple of events for Mr. Connolly, especially the St. Patrick's Day. It was amazing because a lot of high school students were there being involved. So would you be able to comment on that for me?
About turnout at events?
Yes, Mr. Connolly, he has huge turnouts for all of his events, especially the St. Patrick's Day. But Mrs. Byrne doesn't seem to have the same pull for students in her events.
Well, you know, I honestly, I have to say, I have not been to, I haven't really been to many of Ms. Byrne's events, so I don't know what the, you know, what the relative size is. But I think it's important not to confuse turnout at events like that with the actual level of support people have. Those events are very easy to, it's very easy to manipulate events like that to make it appear that somebody has a, I would take it with a grain of salt about you know, whether just because someone has a lot of folks at an event that means that they have a viable campaign.
So at the end of the show, you're not going to take.
No, it'll be
that would make headlines.
It'll be one of the 4 people on the ballot.
That would make headlines on the blogs, and you know we've skirted around it a bit. Let's talk about the blogs. Again, you're an advocate of new media, and I will say off the bat that while sometimes these blogs infuriate me in terms of what they say, certain ones, I will fight to the end to protect the debate and have me ask you, who do you think's going to win? The right to say it. I mean, you don't have freedom of the press if you don't have freedom of speech. Mm-hmm. And some people say, well, they should be sued for this, they shouldn't be allowed to do this. Well, let's go back to the pamphleteers after the Revolution, the Thomas Paines of the world. Let's go to the newspapers of the 1800s.
But Mrs. Byrne doesn't seem to have the same pull for students.
And early 1900s, they all took positions, and not only on their editorial pages, they took them on their front pages. Mm-hmm. Many of the European newspapers are still like that. We have this new, you know, relatively new concept of being objective, but I think we'll all agree that human beings are subjective animals, so as much as a reporter strives and is trained to be objective, mm-hmm. there's always a little bit of subjectiveness that ends up in stories, and hopefully the editors pull that out. Mm-hmm. The blogs are up to their eyeballs in this 11th district race.
They are indeed.
And they've, the 2 of the more prominent or more vocal ones, I will say, have sided with I know Judy Fader's paying one of them. And that's the big thing that political consultants recommend. I go out and buy yourself a blog as soon as you start running. But they drive me crazy. They've taken shots at me. They've taken a couple of shots at you. They've certainly taken shots at some of your colleagues at the Post that you guys have to grin and bear. It's very, it's a tough atmosphere to engage him in because it's clearly one-sided. But I guess what bothers me the most is the tenor and the invective they bring to the debate. I would rather see the candidates hurling insults, invective, whatever at each other personally. You get to watch them doing it than seeing agents doing it from the sidelines, sort of protected by the anonymity of the blogs, although everybody knows who these.
Well, I'm with you. I think that the
Leslie Byrne, and I don't know whether she's paying them or not paying them. I mean, I know Judy Fader's paying one of them. And that's the big thing that political consultants recommend. I go out and buy yourself a blog as soon as you start running. But they drive me crazy. They've taken shots at me. They've taken a couple of shots at you. They've certainly taken shots at some of your colleagues at the Post that you guys have to grin and bear. It's very, it's a tough atmosphere to engage him in because it's clearly one-sided. But I guess what bothers me the most is the tenor and the invective they bring to the debate. I would rather see the candidates hurling insults, invective, whatever at each other personally. You get to watch them doing it than seeing agents doing it from the sidelines, sort of protected by the anonymity of the blogs, although everybody knows who these particular bloggers are. What do you see for the future there?
Well, I'm with you. I think that the blogs have been a good thing. I think that we should be held accountable for what we write. We're in the accountability business, and I think it has added a level of accountability. There are excesses, and I think you're seeing excesses, and you can see those in the political blogs in Virginia and elsewhere. But I read them, they're invaluable.
They're addictive.
They're addictive. They are addictive, exactly. And there are some, there are blogs that do some very distinguished journalism. The Talking Points memo that Joshua Marshall does won a, I think it won a Peabody Award or a Polk Award. I'm sorry, so that they play a really important role. So and look, we have to be able to take a punch, and someone wants to, call us names or this or that, whatever. That's fine. But I think it hurts their credibility when they take such a shrill tone. I think that, if I was doing a blog and I wanted to be taken seriously, I would not be as shrill and as personal, I don't think, as they are.
Whether it's the presidential, whether it's one of the congressionals, whether it's the 10th or the 11th, some of them take this, excuse me, some of them take this tone that my person can do nothing.
And I think with every revel, a huge following, when in fact they may not. So
wrong. And I think, again, it hurts their credibility a little bit in that respect. But overall, I think that they're a welcome addition. Maybe not some blogs in particular, but overall it's a welcome addition. I don't necessarily view them as the press. Some of them, as you said, Josh Marshall's particular bloggers are. What do you see for the future there? And there are many others where they function as reporters. Others are they're more like Evans and Fairfax. They're strictly almost like a columnist. They clearly take a side, they make no bones about it, and they push that side, and the facts be damned. And that's, I think, what bothers me the most. They become vehicles of misinformation.
And they also, some of them have very, withering attitudes about the daily press and the so-called mainstream press. But yet I don't see how a lot of them could possibly function without us. And I would like to sort of see, just almost as an experiment, to sort of do business as if, the newspapers weren't around. and didn't exist, and what would they really have day to day to give their readers. You know, in many ways they feed off of us, and that's fine, but I think that, you know, they so often are ready to sort of pronounce us dead and buried, and yet they depend on us for a lot of what they do day to day.
And when, you know, when you challenge them, they'll argue their freedom of speech, they'll argue the freedom of the press, but are they providing their readership with some kind of an objective view in order for the readership? What they want to do is they want to tell you what your decision is rather than provide you with the tools to make a decision. I think that's one of the big differences between them. But they're here to stay, there's no doubt about it. And I think they're gaining readership, and they'll gain influence. When I say not necessarily individually, but collectively. And I also think that the left, let me backtrack. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, talk radio, and it's still dominated by the O'Reillys and the Limbaughs and those folks who tend to come from the right, generally Republicans, but from the right. And no matter what the Democrats have tried, no matter what the left has tried, they've never succeeded. You know, Air America has not been very successful. Right. They've just never succeeded in talk radio. And it's just amazing the following that some of these right of center, I don't want to call them all right-wingers, but right of center hosts have created. Well, I think it's the exact opposite with the blogs. The blogs are building their strength left of center, and with Democrats and with folks who tend to have democratic type views. And the right side of the equation has been less successful in building readership or even getting noticed in the blogosphere. I
think in both instances they drive the debate on their side. You know, they do wield enormous influence and public officials, politicians are very reactive to you know, it's what they see and hear, you know, on, you know, Republicans, conservatives on the talk radio and the blogs particularly for the left wing of the Democratic Party, and you know, they're players, no question about it.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and we're going to end the show. First of all, I want to wish you the very best as you move on to your next beat. I'm sure it's exciting for you. You have a whole new, you know, reporters are very inquisitive. It's part of the nature. So you're going to learn a whole new skill set now, so to speak, of things. One more question, and you got less than 2 minutes to answer it. What will you miss about covering Fairfax, and what won't you miss?
Let's see. That's a good question. I will miss. Well, I'll miss. I won't be around for the denouement of the Democratic primary. I was looking forward to that, and the congressional race. I'll miss that, and I will miss possibly how the dominoes will fall on the Board of Supervisors, depending on the outcome.
That could be very interesting.
Could be very interesting. That was all. I was very happy to stay here and watch that. What I won't miss, I don't know. And I'm not wimping out here, but there's nothing that leaps out as something that you know, probably won't miss. I won't miss some of the critiques in the blogs, you know, but I won't miss that. But generally, it's been a very positive and interesting and challenging experience here. So I will look back in a very positive way about being out here.
Well, you certainly made your mark in your period of time here. Everyone won't agree with me, but I think there was some damn good reporting done on your part.
Thank you.
And I don't purport to be an expert, but I've certainly done it myself and have dealt with reporters for either in the business or outside of the business as a press secretary, whatever, for 35 years. And I think that you accurately portrayed what's been going on here in Fairfax. So we could probably talk for another hour, but it's time for us to go. Thanks for watching. Bill Turk, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And good luck in your future endeavors.
Thanks.